So here I am in the source code responsible for the app you saw in the last lecture. And as you can see, here I got three major components and then some subcomponents of these components. In the app component, I'm loading them all. My home component, my users component, and the servers component. For now, I'm going to ignore my subcomponents here, edit server and a single server, so we will later nest this even more. But for now, it would be nice if of these three components, I would only display one at a time, so that we can dynamically load them by clicking on these links here at the top, and we really load a different route in our app. Now, where do we register such routes? Let's think about this logically. These routes are responsible for our whole app. Everywhere in our application, if we enter /users, we want to load the users component as our main page, let's say. So since this is really a core part of our app, where should we register it? Well, the app module sounds like a good place, because here is where we configure our app, where we add all these components and so on. So this might be a good place to also inform Angular about the routes our application has. And it is. So here above this @ng-module decorator here, I will add a new constant and I will name it app routes because it should hold all the routes of my application. Now this routes constant should be of a specific type, the routes type, which needs to be imported from @AngularRouter. So make sure to add this import at the top. This is the type informing Angular or giving these routes some structure, I should say. You don't necessarily have to add it here, but it is a good practice. Now with this import added and the constant set up, what should this constant actually hold? It should hold an array because we will have multiple routes. So we add all the routes we want to set up to this array for now. And each route now is just a JavaScript object in this array. Now the question is, how should such a route be configured in an Angular app? It has to follow a specific pattern, a specific structure for Angular to be able to use it. And this structure always needs a path. This is what gets entered in the URL after your domain. This should be a string. And the first route I want to add could be my users route. This allows me to then visit localhost or whatever your domain is, 4200 in this case here, and then /users. So that is your path without the slash. And this is important. Make sure you don't add the slash here. This would be incorrect. Add it without the slash. So this is now the path, and this will later allow Angular to determine which route in our array of routes here should be selected if we enter something in the URL or click some link, because it clearly defines, well, which path this route should be. Now we also need to define what should happen when this path here is reached. Right now, nothing happens. It's a route, but yeah, there is no action attached to it. The action typically is a component, so that you inform Angular that once this path here is reached, a certain component should be loaded. And this component will then be the page, you could say, which gets loaded. So here for users, it sounds about right to load our users component. And of course, it's up to you to make sure that in your application, you are indeed, well, configuring your components you want to serve as pages, to look like pages, to have all the content you want to have on this page. In this case, that's the case for my users component. Here, at least for now, it will output my list of users and then the single user component next to it. And we will later improve this to also be able to select a user from this list of users here, but for now that's fine. So this is now my first route with the users component getting loaded once we target /users. Now let's add a couple of other routes. I'll duplicate this or replicate this twice. I also want to have a certain page I display once we have just localhost 4200, so an empty path after it, you could say. So we should also create a route for this with just an empty path. And here I want to load my home component. This is the starting page, you could say. You, of course, don't need to have such an empty path, but then you somehow need to handle this, well, the user accesses an empty path differently, and I will come back to this later. So for now, we have an empty path, just localhost 4200 loading the home component, /users will load the users component, and I also want to have /servers, which will load my server or servers component. With that, 3 routes are set up here, but that alone won't do anything. How would Angular know that you want to use this constant? You could have added any constant here, and the name app routes, well, that is totally up to you. So right now these routes will be ignored by Angular, and the type routes here doesn't do anything when it comes to this. So we somehow need to register these routes in our app. And we do this by adding a new import here to this imports array. We need to add the router module here, and the router module should be imported from our @Angular router package here. So with this added, we're adding the routing functionality to our app, but still our routes are not registered. That is why this router module has a special method we can call forRoute, which allows us to register some routes for our main application here. So forRoute will now receive our app routes constant here as an argument, and with that our routes are now registered in our Angular app on this router module, which gives us this routing functionality, and now Angular knows our routes. The missing piece is some place to render the currently selected component, because if you have a look at our app component template, we still add our components here with their selector. Now, okay, we visit /users, so Angular knows we want to load the users page, but how does it know where to display it? How does it know if you want to display it here, or maybe here in the header? It doesn't know. So the right place to inform it where to load it is to get rid of all these rows here but one, so only have the place where you actually want to render your route. And now you don't add your component with its selector, but you add a special directive shipping with Angular, the router outlet. Now this looks like a component, but it still only is a directive. Keep in mind, directives may have any selector, including this component or this element style selector. And with this now simply marks the place in our document where we want the Angular router to load the component of the currently selected route. And with this all set up, if we now save this and let it rebuild therefore, we should see that this rebuilds successfully. And if we visit our page now, you see we only see the home page now. And if we now enter /users here, we see the users page. And if we enter /servers, we see the servers page. So this is working. Of course, our links are not working. This is something we will work on next.